Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify to stay tuned for our weekly episodes. My name is Lydia, and joining us today is Paul Abercrombie, Director, Talent Acquisition from Klaviyo. He's in charge of talent acquisition for Europe, Middle East, Africa, as well as Asia Pacific. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Lydia. Well, thanks for welcoming me on.
It was great to have you here. So, Paul, you've spent almost your entire career in recruitment and talent acquisition. You started with a role as an internal recruiter with the Ministry of Defense for some years, and then moved on to become a sales recruiter. Then you spent the last 13 years or so in talent acquisition, focusing on these regions, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and also APAC. So that's a huge geographic coverage right there. So tell us about your experiences through these years, Paul. What's kept you in the TA space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I think about how long I've been recruiting now, it makes me feel a little bit old, to be honest. But nearly 20 years in total. But as you said, 13 years in the tech space. So I started at the Ministry of Defense in the UK as a civil servant. There are thousands and thousands of civil servants in the UK working for various government organizations. It was a great learning experience for me. As a civil servant, you kind of have a career mapped out in front of you. It's quite comfortable, but ultimately I felt as though I wanted to kind of push myself and challenge myself in the commercial world, let's say. And so sort of 6 years in the recruiting team there. And then I moved to a company called Sales Logic, which was a sales recruitment agency. And I was employee number one. So the founder hired myself, and then we hired sort of 2 or 3 other people, very early days business at that time. And I joined in 2009. But nonetheless, so 2.5 years there, I did manage to be successful. I did manage to find some clients, and I did manage to get some good momentum. And I look back very fondly on that time. Like, it feels like a short time, 2.5 years, but it taught me so much, put me out of my comfort zone so many times. And it really helped me as well figure out, okay, like what's important for me, what do I enjoy, and ultimately, where is my skill set? So that then led me to join Bazaar Voice. So Bazaar Voice were actually a client of mine from an agency perspective. I looked at and he knew that ultimately that's the direction I wanted to go, like in-house with a tech company. And cut a long story short, ultimately I ended up moving over to Bazaar Voice. At that time, 2009, it was still like having an in-house team was still a bit of a novelty. Like in the US, it's certainly built out a lot more, but an internal TA function in a company at that time, in Europe, we were about 25 to 30 people. So still very small. And so it was exciting because there weren't a lot of people like me in London at that time. I'm starting to see more and more of it, but it was a really exciting step for me. A lot of the skills that I learned from the agency world, I was able to move over to Bazaar Voice and help that team scale and grow. So in total, I was there 12 years, which is a huge amount of time. Like, it's especially in the tech world, you sort of see 4 or 5 years, and that's usually considered, that's quite a good time. But for me, it was an amazing journey there. I joined as a recruiter. I was then promoted to a senior recruiter. And then I was given the opportunity to lead the global team from London. So we had a team of recruiters in the US as well, and a manager in the US. So that reported up to me, as well as my team in London. But by that time, we also had a team in Lithuania and a team in India as well. And so it truly was a global role over 4 different time zones, with people in all of those time zones and people in my team, but then also hiring managers themselves. So it was a long time, but brilliant experience for me. And also on a personal level, I've got so many fond memories of my time there, but it was just the right time for me to go and do something else. Klaviyo came along. In truth, I hadn't heard of I'd sort of heard of the company because I'm relatively familiar with tech firms.
Also in the tech space. So So you've had your base there already for 12 years.
Exactly, yeah. And so the mission here at Klaviyo was to grow out EMEA, and then in time look at APAC as well. And so that's exactly what I've done essentially. And to the second part of your question, what's kept me in this field? So it's obvious that bringing opportunities to people through their career at great companies like Klaviyo or Bizarre Voice or Sales Logic before that, it's just very rewarding, right? There's in my recruiter roles, you know, I'm not so hands-on with the roles now, but sort of managing a process, seeing people come through, seeing them join the company, seeing them then grow and be promoted through the company. It's just very rewarding, and I've taken a lot from that through all of my years of doing that. It's also always going to be challenging in whatever capacity within TA you are. There are multiple skill sets that you need to use, and I've seen this more and more lately. Particularly, you need to be a great salesperson. You need to be a consultant. You need to be strong at marketing. You need to be a project manager. You need to be a data analyst. You have to be strong in all of those areas, and that gives you variety, and what's more exciting than that?
And you've got to be a great communicator because you're dealing with people as well.
Exactly. Stakeholder management internally, dealing with hiring managers, employees, VPs, C-level execs, and then just as importantly, candidates externally, being able to sort of articulate a company's vision and goals and values and how that may link in with their own particular vision and goals, and then ultimately manage a process with those candidates as well.
So you've been overseeing talent acquisition across EMEA and APAC for Klaviyo for just over a year now. Oh, that's an interesting post-pandemic period. It's another period of uncertainty, etc. So what are some areas of TA and recruitment maybe that you have prioritized since you've taken on this role?
Yeah, absolutely. My first priority was really building out my team, as I needed people here to deliver what lay in front of us, basically. So end of 2021 into 2022, we went from one person that was here already, and she's still here today and doing a fantastic job. So we went from one person to 6 in the team, including a recruiter down in APAC and also myself. And from there, it's challenging to have so many new people so quickly, but at the same time, it gives you a great opportunity to sort of set the groundwork and to sort of set the right expectations and develop a bit of a rhythm for the team. So first focus really was on building the partnerships with the business and the hiring managers and the people in my team. So to that point, they hadn't been used to having such a good resource in-house from a people point of view. And so we were really able to step up in lots of areas and show how we can add value to the process and ultimately drive a successful talent acquisition strategy. Working hand in hand with those stakeholders and hiring managers is the key thing, right? That partnership needs to be tight, it needs to be shared, and it needs to be one that is very open and honest as well. And if you do that well, everything else kind of will lead on from that. If I think back of some of the subtleties of the pandemic and how we had to adapt and change, there's a few points that spring to mind. We continue to interview remote today. We focused on building out our processes to ensure that we are evaluating candidates' skills and competencies as you'd expect, but also allowing the candidate to get a real feel of Klaviyo and what we're all about from a values perspective. Like, doing that remotely is more challenging, even in the world that we've now adapted to, where interviewing over Zoom or whatever is pretty much the norm. We still get a sense that it's harder to give that candidate that real sense of what the company's all about. Some companies will sell themselves and they're well-known global brands that you know. But for smaller sort of companies like us that are trying to build that brand out there, it's a little bit more challenging. And so we've definitely had to work quite hard on helping every touch point of the process, help to build that picture of Klaviyo, our values, what we're all about, and why we're an exciting place to come and work.
Did you have to build that ground up, or did you have already some kind of foundation already set up in terms of what the employer brand?
There was definitely a foundation there, and I should say the work is still ongoing. In truth, like we still need to develop it further, let's say. But a lot of the fundamental pieces, just like how a hiring manager would engage with a candidate. Ultimately, I came in and saw lots of great things, but just some of the way that we take 5 minutes to sell Klaviyo, we talk to a particular benefit, or we really highlight career growth and development plans within the company. There was some incredible things that we're doing here that we weren't necessarily articulating in a really strong way to candidates. So there was a baseline. There was lots of quick wins that we developed. And then, as I said, we're still working on.
You've focused on the EMEA and APAC regions for years now, as you've just said. So has that period of disruption, that pandemic period, maybe the post-pandemic period even, has that changed the talent market in this region in your experience?
Absolutely, yes. And I think anyone else in my position would say a similar thing. I'll speak to my own views and own experience of it, which, depending on what industry you're in and depending what sector and depending where you are in the world, it will probably be slightly different. But I've sort of seen it in two waves, if that makes sense. So the first wave within tech, and we are, my previous company and this company as well, is a company that sells technology to e-commerce businesses. And so the first 9 to 12 months of the pandemic, once everyone in the world had kind of figured what was going on and, okay, this is going to be around for a while, and we all need to sort of adjust and adapt some ways, tech really began to accelerate in terms of hiring. Like all of the companies, particularly in this space selling to e-commerce, realized that e-commerce was going to accelerate very quickly through COVID. So within e-commerce itself, the share of trade in 2019 was 14%, and that moved to 17% in 2020. So it's only a 3% change, but a 3% change in global commerce is a huge amount. And we saw this continue through most of 2021, right? So there was still sort of this momentum and this shift. What we've seen in more recent times is that it's changed a little bit, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But in that time of accelerated growth for e-commerce, it had a knock-on effect across the business. Like my team were going more quickly, sales teams, marketing, customer success, everything was going more quickly. The ability to find the right, to attract, to find and attract the right talent was so competitive during that time. It was particularly challenging. I was just going to say, so just second point on that, there are some changes that in terms of the candidate market, like as we think about the talent market as a whole, some things have changed and will remain forever. I think it truly is now a candidate-driven market. Companies have to recognize things that are important to candidates and make sure that they are making themselves an attractive proposition to those candidates. So if I think specifically areas around work-life balance, hugely important to me personally and every colleague around me in truth. The openness to remote working, company values, and position on things like sustainability or giving back. I see more and more of that being very relevant. And then diversity, equity, inclusion, more than just saying, what does this mean for employees? What results have you had? And what is in place to make sure it creates a legacy within a company rather than just a one-off moment in time. So something that is that will grow as the company grows as well. Previously, compensation was always thought as the biggest driver in a candidate's decision, but I see now these things being equally important and quite often more important, especially when the work-life balance piece and the diversity piece.
Yeah, so these are all really big changes, or rather gradual changes, actually, not sudden, but it's forecasted. People talk about it.
Yeah, I do wonder, even if the pandemic hadn't have happened, right? We all wish that, I'm sure. But if we'd sat here 3 years ago and looked at the future of work, I suspect a lot of the things that have happened, we would have said, I suspect in 10 years, most people will be working remotely. But the pandemic has accelerated all of that. And I think that is a benefit in some ways, because it's kind of accelerated our move to the future of work in some ways.
And there's also this uncertainty that we're moving into in terms of the economy and where it's headed to. And so there are plenty of question marks in terms of how businesses would do. And, we've seen companies that have laid off their staff. And so there are plenty of things that we are going to face into 2023 as well. But given all these changes that you've just talked about, and especially the need to quickly hire and hire right, find the right talent and attract them, how did it change your approach to TA in this one year plus in Klaviyo?
Yeah. Definitely. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, in that first wave where everything just started going very quickly, it was very competitive. There was very high demand for talent across the board. Going back to what I said earlier about recruiters having to be multi-skilled in lots of areas, that situation almost forced itself upon the TA industry, I would say. Like, you had to step up across the board in all the different areas. TA needs to be the thing that's always been in terms of delivering good talent into an organization, but it's needed to step up in those other areas. To give an example, employer branding is a big one, and you touched on it earlier as well, but some companies are lucky enough to kind of have like an in-house team that develops an employer brand. We're lucky enough to have one here at Klaviyo. But lots of smaller companies won't, and where that happens, it basically falls with TA, and ultimately TA have to now kind of construct this vision and this brand that they can then portray to candidates. I should say, even in larger companies that have that function, it still needs to kind of filter out through the TA team, right? But I see so many companies, particularly small companies, and you can tell there's probably one recruiter there or two recruiters. They're doing so many wonderful creative things for probably no budget or very little budget that ultimately is driving great engagement one way or another. So I'd say, sorry, to go back to your question in terms of what's changed, the employer branding bit really sticks out for me. But then this whole notion of recruiters having to become these multi-skilled individuals. Like, before, had a job board, candidates apply, screen candidates, pass to hiring managers. But now it's a lot wider than that. To be honest, it was evolving to that before pandemic as well. But again, I just think pandemic has accelerated that.
Did it put added pressure? I would imagine it had, on the speed for hiring. I mean, you need this talent right now, and then all these things coming together, like employer branding, sourcing. Then you've got finding the right fit, and then maybe a lag in terms of timing. Has that influenced, or has it in any way affected the time to hire?
It has. I think about the space that I'm in. There's always been a need for speed, let's say. Like, the demand for talent is high. When you're in a high growth company, the targets are quite aggressive. And so then you have to sort of really ramp up your processes to match that. But what I'm seeing now is, and through the work of my team and probably lots of similar teams out there, is more of a kind of shared understanding of how competitive the talent market is and how collectively we can work together to try and make our hiring processes as efficient as possible, but not sort of drop in the bar or skipping steps or fundamentally missing any of the key points that we need to cover with candidates. And so I see it more as like a shared responsibility as opposed to, hey, the T18 just needs to go faster. Everyone needs to go faster, and everyone needs to think about how to do that. But also, speed doesn't necessarily equal great results all of the time, right? And it's a balancing act. We are measured on time to hire here, but and in my previous company, but it's always with a caveat of quality. Ultimately, that's the biggest driving factor behind it.
And there are plenty of challenges up ahead for TA. As you've said, a looming downturn, maybe in critical talent shortages. So there's this survey from Manpower Group that shows how talent shortages have reached a 16-year high. There are 3 out of 4 employers reporting difficulty getting the talent they need, as you just illustrated earlier yourself.
Yeah.
So what are some talent acquisition or recruitment trends to look out for as we head into 2023?
I think heading into 2023, there are a few things that spring to mind. A lot of stuff I've kind of already touched on in some ways. A couple of areas I haven't, like automation of processes. And I see that in 2 parts, like artificial intelligence is becoming better and better. There are opportunities to use tech in smart ways that will help drive efficiencies in your process, linking back to what I said earlier, but not impact on candidate experience. I'll phrase this slightly differently. If you're in a company, perhaps a large company, and you post a marketing job, and you're a very well-known global brand, and you get 1,000 applications for that one role. Now, firstly, lucky you, because that's a great situation to be in, but it throws up all kinds of challenges around how to manage that in the best possible way. And there are technologies out there that can scan resumes, CVs, and use AI to make pretty smart assessments on the within that 1,000, like the top 20 candidates based on certain criterias, and those are the ones that perhaps are the ones that get focused on. So I think automating processes through AI will become more and more interesting. I think the other piece that is interesting, certainly in my opinion, is companies in terms of sharing of information and really almost building their brand around the diverse opportunity that a candidate might have within a certain organization. I see that as something every company is doing, but I could see it becoming like the number one factor that a employer will focus on sharing with candidates.
Even beyond, we've seen so many companies using more and more technology, as you've said, and these technologies require some amount of tech talent to come in and drive them, right? So what would you say, coming from your tech recruitment experience as well, what would you say are the biggest challenges facing tech recruitment now, especially now and moving forward into the future, and how might we tackle them?
Yeah, it's a really tough one. Tech recruitment, I mean, companies are working harder and harder to keep their top talent, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong, right? So the talent that is strong and successful, they're being well looked after by their current companies. In my experience with Bazaar, which is probably more relevant, where we had to really look at globally where those talent hubs are. We had traditionally looked at the US, and we'd built an engineering team in the US, which served us really well through our high growth time. But over time, we realized that ultimately focusing on one location wasn't. It was just becoming more and more competitive, and it was something everyone was just almost becoming a bit exhausted with, because it was just pushing things too much, and we had to diversify geographically. And so initially we opened up in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I'm going back sort of 3 or 4 years now, but Belfast, Northern Ireland, and then we moved into India much later on. And so we ended up with like 3 talent hubs across the globe, one in the US, one in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and one in India. And that was really successful in terms of opening markets where there was then a whole new playing field for us to go and look for talent. Now, what we then saw, we'd have the sort of the initial buzz and excitement and growth, but then within each of those locations, it would become more and more competitive as well. So we sort of had a mini occurrence of the same thing in each one, but just working across the 3 locations was a lot more successful for us. So I would say to those companies that they just need to be ready to be open-minded to global working and global locations. I know in engineering that makes it very difficult sometimes with the teams, and you have your scrum teams and your products that you're focusing on, but I think that would be the number one thing to help people straight away. And then all of the other things that I've kind of touched on, right? Just ensuring a company is very open with their values and their plans and what it's like to work there, and work-life balance and growth opportunities. All this sounds very obvious, but the more work you can put into that, the better, really. And then compensation is an interesting one. Like I said earlier, I think the companies that are looking after their top talent, it's often a comp thing, right? They're getting 10, 15, 20% bumps in their salary. And it's very hard for any company to then just continue to sort of say, well, we'll pay 10% more and we'll pay 10% more. And I think that's kind of finished now, where companies are just like, okay, that's getting a bit out of control. Like, how can we really build all of the other things to make this attractive for people? That tech talent, I would say, for the sort of global mobility pay, so the ability to kind of work from anywhere, I would say in terms of like career growth and goals are particularly important right now. Don't get me wrong, the compensation piece will always be there, but I would say that flexible working piece, and then the pathway within the companies.
And I suppose that's where employer branding, as you mentioned earlier, would play a big role, just to show people and give them a vision of what their life or their career might look like in your organization and how far they can go.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that should jump out when people look at a company. And then going back to what I said earlier, we've done here is then as they meet people and talk to people, that theme is continued, right? It's like a subconscious marketing, the way brands market to us, right? We see an advert on the TV, we notice something online, we see it in the newspaper, we see someone wearing the shoes or whatever, and we start to build a picture of that brand, and a brand can do it because their stuff is out there in the world, right? But in a TA situation, you only have a few opportunities, right? It's your job advert that you've posted. It's the link that person then clicks on. It's that first conversation with the recruiter. It's the conversation with the hiring manager. It's such tiny things like the email signature of the person that you're interacting with. If there's a nice link in there to something cool and something interesting, we only have so many opportunities to build that brand, and we have to do it well.
And there's some candidates who, I've seen this personally, and we've heard people share that, they see the brand and then they sort of get a second validation of what it's like to work there by asking someone else, hey, what do you think of this brand? So the need for maybe even internal ambassadors, your brand ambassadors to come from within is also another thing that
it's massive. Yeah. We've developed a system like we have. So any hiring manager that is interviewing people at Klaviyo will go through hiring manager training, and they will learn to understand how to think about jobs and how to build interview processes, and think about competencies, thinking about how to interview people, etc., etc. But there's a piece on there as well around how to articulate the brand and what it means to you, and how you can pass that on to candidates. And it needs to be authentic, right? As well, it has to be balanced. Like I don't want it to be. I want someone to be very open and honest with challenges, but because ultimately I think people are drawn to those challenges as well, and they see how there's an opportunity to go and fix those challenges. There's a lot out there, Glassdoor and others, that candidates will be able to get a very good picture of that brand. And then when they talk to someone, if that doesn't quite match up with other stuff that then all of a sudden it does ring a few alarm bells. So I think authenticity is very important in building that brand message as well. Absolutely. Especially in a one-to-one scenario when you're talking with a hiring manager.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you earlier you mentioned something very critical, which is the use of technology moving into 2023. And plenty of companies today use HR technology or recruitment technology to find, attract, and retain top talent. But going in that direction, what would you say might be 3 HR tech trends in the near future?
But I would say the automation piece is important now, and it will continue to be more and more important. What I've seen is quite interesting is using AI to target candidates as well. I guess that would be less for companies directly, but for job boards or agencies or whatever it might be, the ability to kind of look at a community and to match jobs to people and to interact with those people, telling them about jobs. I guess you're kind of building a system there that is more aligned to the way people live their lives these days, interacting with social media or whatever it might be. But I think the old system where you have a job board, a candidate searches and applies for a job, it's still relevant today, but I feel it's slightly out of date. And to have those job boards evolve now into more of a kind of a network or a community where they're applying for jobs, but it's more of a kind of a two-way thing. So there's communication from the tech to the candidate, and then a decision is made and they apply for the jobs and they take it from there, basically. So I think that automation AI piece is very important there. When you asked me this question, a thing that's kind of sprung to mind was consolidation of tools. So there are so many tools out there which almost kind of blows your mind. And honestly, if I said yes to everything, I would just never get anything done, because there is a tool literally for everything, which is great, but at the same time, it makes getting stuff done sometimes very difficult because there's so many tools that you have to think about or to use. I love the idea of consolidation of tools. And this is something that I'm not going to solve, or you're not going to solve here. It's more for the people that are working at some of these larger, like your LinkedIns of this world, like how they can consolidate some of these things into one place. If that were possible, then I feel as though it would make everyone's lives a lot easier. Maybe I'm speaking as someone, I don't know, like that perhaps needs a more simplistic view. I don't know, but I do sometimes struggle with the volume of tools out there, and to find one tool that does lots of things. I love that. There's a company that we work with here in Europe, a company called Otter, that I think is doing great things at the moment. And the beauty of what they have is this kind of consolidation of things. So they're a job board, that they're also a platform that we can interact with candidates directly. They also do a lot of the AI stuff, reaching out to candidates, but they also have a really good diversity piece, which is really helpful for us as well. And so I could probably go out there and find 4 tools that do that, but that's 4 different systems to log into, 4 different systems that need to talk to all of my other systems here, and 4 different systems to get everyone else trained on and used to using. Whereas actually, if I've just got one system that does all of those things, I sleep better at night, put it that way. It might be, like I said, that's the way I'm wired, but I do think, as I often talk to vendors, like the consolidation piece is a key one.
And integrating these tools to match what you need at that point, and also what you need in the future. Right, yeah. I think you raised an interesting point earlier about the solutions that would help in terms of finding diverse hires and looking for diverse candidates. Diversity is a huge piece, and we lots of people are trying to bring their hiring strategies towards diversity and trying to open that up. And a big aspect of ensuring that you have diverse hires is also making sure that your recruitment teams and members in your team diverse themselves. So what might be some factors for leaders, talent acquisition heads of recruitment teams? What should they be thinking about when they structure a team of diverse recruiters?
Yeah. When looking at diverse hiring, there is a temptation sometimes to think, I need to invest in a new tool or build a new strategy or, launch this initiative within the company. I actually feel diverse recruiting is honestly just recruiting done well. And that might go against the grain sometimes, but I think if you're building your TA strategy or recruiting strategy from the ground up, and you think about all the things that you need to do well, almost organically, that should bring you to a place where actually you're creating quite a good, diverse recruiting system. So you're removing influences on unconscious bias in your process. Mm-hmm. You're developing a competency-based interview framework that is consistent from one candidate to the next, ensuring that you're leveraging all the channels for incoming candidates. So like over-reliance on one can have a negative effect on diversity in the pipeline. For example, if we hire 10 people and all 10 people are referrals into the company, chances are that there will be some adverse effect on diversity there. Train your hiring managers on this and develop an ongoing cadence for ensuring it remains top of mind. I touched on it earlier with our hiring manager training. We go into that as well. Like, all of these things I feel like are fundamental pieces of recruiting, and if you do all of these well, the net effect of that will hopefully positively impact your diversity. Now, if you're in a situation where you feel you're doing all of that and you're still not seeing the results, then that's probably the point where you think, right, okay, we need external support through an agency, or we need to, from the ground up, work on different initiatives, et cetera, et cetera. But going back to my point, and one of my colleagues here at Klaviyo, she helped me really sort of understand this in great detail, that a good, diverse recruiting strategy is just recruiting done well, in my opinion.
What about the recruitment team itself? I mean,
the recruitment team itself. Yeah. I think your recruitment team ultimately needs to be a very good balance of diversity. You need to leverage all of the different avenues for candidates coming in. And if you have a recruitment team that are all the same in one way or another, then ultimately the flow of candidates could look kind of similar from one recruiter to the next. So it's very important that you think about that as you build out your recruitment team. I'm lucky enough here to have 4 females and 1 male in my team, and a real mix of ethnicity within that as well. And that allows us to hopefully see a positive impact on candidates coming through.
Also on, as you mentioned earlier, employer branding, right? So when you've got people from various backgrounds, like your team, who are articulating the employer brand, you would come from different perspectives as well, and that enriches the employer brand, especially for diverse candidates. So it plays a big role, definitely, in attracting diverse candidates, as you mentioned earlier. Do you have any perspectives on that one?
Yes, it's very important. And an employer needs to be very inclusive in the way that they attract and then keep diverse talent. going back to sort of some of the challenges that we spoke about earlier, a lot of companies are doing this, right? They're realizing they need to attract more diverse talent, and so then internally, the diverse talent that we have is getting attracted to other opportunities, and so the talent that we have here, we need to ensure, and this is across the board, we need to ensure that there are those growth opportunities, that there are those development opportunities, those learning opportunities, that people can really grow with the company. We need to ensure that our leadership teams are diverse, and so people can aspire to look upwards and sort of see that path for them, and that sends a big message internally. I think it's very important for companies to celebrate diversity, to recognize all the different events throughout the calendar year that are significant to different people. I love it when I go onto LinkedIn and I scroll down and I see all these various celebrations in different parts of the world for various events. I think that's a really important piece of it as well for that individual to know that their company kind of values something like that.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your time and your insights today. And for the benefit of our listeners and those watching, where can they connect with you?
They can jump on to LinkedIn and find me there. Paul Abercrombie at Klaviyo. There's not a lot of Paul Abercrombies out there, so you'll find me easily enough.
And we have been in conversation with Paul Abercrombie, Director of Talent Acquisition, EMEA and APAC at Klaviyo. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels and stay tuned for more weekly episodes from All in Recruitment. Thank you.